If you're looking for homeschool sanity, welcome. I'm Dr. Melanie Wilson, Christian psychologist turned homeschool mom and curriculum author. But I was once so disorganized, I thought I had to quit homeschooling and stop having kids. Now, by the grace of God, I have 6 homeschool graduates. Whether we're discussing parenting, productivity, or practical tips, I pray that this episode is just what you need for happy, healthy homeschooling. Hey, homeschoolers. As parents, we often feel ill-equipped to talk to others who are grieving. I've discussed this in a previous episode that I will link in the show notes. When our teens are grieving, we can feel particularly helpless in knowing what to say or do. I'm thankful that my guest, Sarah Arthur, has practical advice for us. Sarah Arthur is a fun-loving speaker and the author of a dozen books for teens and adults, including Once a Queen and the best-selling Walking with Frodo, a devotional journey through The Lord of the Rings. Among other nerdy adventures, she has served as preliminary fiction judge for Christianity Today's Book Awards, was a founding board member of the annual C.S. Lewis Festival in Northern Michigan, and co-directs the Madeline LaEngle Writing Retreats. Here's my chat with Sarah. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me here on the Homeschool Sanity Show. I am excited to jump into our topic today, but before we do that, I would love to have you introduce yourself and your family to us.
It is so fun to be on here with you. Thank you so much, Melanie. My name is Sarah Arthur, and my husband Tom and I live in Lansing, Michigan with our 2 boys. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. So we are in ministry here in the capital city of Michigan.
Fantastic. And you are a writer and you have been involved in youth ministry for a long time too, you told me.
Yes, yeah. Right after college, I had double majored in both English and Christian education at Wheaton College. And so I had ended up in Northern Michigan working at a large church as the youth director. But I had been an English major, so I really didn't know what I was doing. I had to learn how to raise my voice and, coordinate things like paintball, which I knew nothing about. But 25-ish years later, after, I was full-time and now I've just done volunteer youth work for years. And actually lately have been a middle school substitute teacher in the public school district here. And so teens are my thing, especially kids in that liminal space between childhood and adulthood, that 13, 14, 15, where they're beginning to make the turn. And that's who I write for.
Mm-hmm. Well, bless you for doing that. I mean, it is such a need that we have people who love on kids in that phase of their lives. They will, I think, remember what you poured into them for years and years. I certainly do remember the people who were involved in my life. So I just really appreciate that. And I have 5 boys, so I get it. Mine are all grown, but
yeah, when we're done, you can just, give me a little pep talk about so disorienting, to be like, okay, I hear the shower running and I didn't have to tell him to do that. He just instinctively knows that this is what must be done now in 7th grade.
Yes, I remember those days. I had my daughter who was really the shower police for my youngest son. She would say, "How long has it been?" Getting there.
I can usually tell just by smell. With the 10-year-old. They would die if they knew I was having this conversation, though.
Yeah.
Right. So moving on.
Don't share it with them. Okay. So today we're going to talk about teens and processing grief and loss and how they can do that. We have um, some different ideas about how they can do that. And I am interested, before we jump into that, about how you became interested in that topic in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, because the first books I wrote, believe it or not, my first book came out 20 years ago. It was Walking with Frodo, a devotional journey through the Lord of the Rings. And I wrote it for the teens that I'd just been working with in youth ministry, in part, and partly because I'm an English major nerd. And so it blended my love of youth ministry and literature, really. And what I loved about The Lord of the Rings was the way that, um, as a fantasy story, Tolkien, who was a Christian, would still plumb the depths of the joy and sorrow that both go hand in hand in our journey, almost like giving the readers and watchers permission. Um, to not just be caught up in the adventure of it, but to also plumb the depths of what is it that you really long for in this world? And how do we make that journey, recognizing that by the end of it, we will be wounded. It's part of being human. And the character of Frodo in The Lord of the Rings at the end, he gets home, which shouldn't be a spoiler. I mean, the book's been out forever, so hopefully people have read it. He gets home, but he's not the same, and he bears in his body wounds that will never heal in this life. So I felt that was really, it was obviously great to talk with teens about the story, and the fun of it and all the characters. But what was really interesting to me was that honoring of the reader's humanity, and dignity as a complex person whose story, what we experience in our life might not always have like, it'll have an ending that was worthwhile, but might not always be perfect, like for sometimes Tolkien was inspired by the Nordish idea of the long defeat, right? That we are caught up in a story that, Jesus went to the cross first before the beautiful things happened. So that's really how I got started. And some of it was me listening to teenagers. I would do small groups and we would read books together and read the Bible together. But I also would ask them two questions. And lots of families do this, but it's a very ancient Christian tradition, to consider, where did you find joy today or this week? Where did God show up in ways that you recognized as wonderful? And where did you feel sorrow or brokenness or pain this week? Recognizing that God is there in those moments too. So, I would keep it simple. What made you happy this week? What made you sad? And as I heard the students talking, a lot of times they would say, well, my happy was that I made it on the debate team. But my real happy is that I got to see my dad. I miss my dad, or my sad was that I got cut from, first, I'm only on the bench for basketball. But my real sad is that my mom and I had a big fight.
Mm.
And so I began to lock into the fact that, yes, they have these sort of superficial happies and sads, but the really high highs and low lows were family related. That was the stuff where their hearts were really hurting.
That
So,
that is
yeah.
very good, and I love
Mm,
those questions. We've asked versions of those questions in our
mm,
family,
mm, mhm.
on a daily basis, but I
Yeah.
really like, um, I like weekly too. I think
Mhm,
maybe
mhm.
it gives us a little bit more perspective, especially when it comes to, um, maybe the deeper issues. Kind of gives us a
Yeah.
little bit more distance so that we can realize, okay, something is still having an impact on me that I maybe didn't recognize in the moment.
Mhm. Mm.
That is
Yeah.
an excellent practice for families. I think just to practice good mental health.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, and we
and
would do
support.
this with our boys, when they were small, happy and
Hmm.
sad, or those are emotions they recognize, and we still do that with them now, so,
Hmm.
as daily as we can.
Right, right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's no
yeah.
rule.
No, no,
Right.
but it's a really ancient Christian practice. I mean, if you have any Catholic listeners, they will recognize this as what's known as the Ignatian Examen.
Hmm.
Saint Ignatius, when he was training his community of Christian believers, had them really probe the depths of their emotional life hundreds of years ago, which is super insightful because it predates modern psychology and understandings of validating emotions, but recognizing that God's not offended if we're sad or grieving. Um, and of course, the book of Psalms is full of lament. It has almost more lament psalms than praise psalms.
Hmm.
So this is a part of what God's people have been doing for a long, long time.
Hmm. Such a good point, too. And the idea that we don't shy away from sadness and
Mhm,
think that
mhm.
as Christians, we always have to put on a happy face when it's not authentic. This
Sure.
is
Yeah.
an excellent practice for sound mental health that will serve
Mhm.
our kids very, very well in the future.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
love that we're giving that very practical tip for
Yeah.
homeschooling moms too. I
Mhm.
read your story, Sarah, as part of your book, and I was wondering if you could tell us about that, and
Mhm. Mhm.
specifically about what you learned about generational grief and how
Mhm.
there are
Mhm.
losses and sadnesses that can be passed down in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so yeah, Once a Queen is my debut novel, and it was my first time not doing just like really overt theological work in what I write. I'm not just being like, here's what somebody has written in fiction, and let's talk about it. Now it's my chance to like give this fiction thing a try, and it was such a beautiful opportunity to do that sort of Holy Spirit work, where we're sneaking in the back door of the imagination instead of coming through the front door of reason and rationality, because I really believe that's the gift of fiction, is the opportunity to experience something when your resistance is kind of down, like you're really much more open to stepping inside of a story than you are being confronted with like principles or ideas that you have to accept or reject. And of course, teenagers are very good at that, telling you exactly what they accept or reject. Whereas with the imagination, it's a whole different journey. So when I was a child, at age 14, um, you know some of this, but you don't know all of it. So I'll give a little more background, because in the Q author Q&A in the back of Once a Queen, there is some more detail about things for me. I witnessed two family losses. The first was my uncle, who had had leukemia. He had been in remission for years. But when he came out of remission, he went home to his childhood home, which was my grandparents' home that I had also lived in with my family when I was little. And he went home to die. So instead of dying in a hospital, surrounded by monitors and strangers taking care of him, he chose to be at my grandparents' house. He was on oxygen, but when he went into a coma, we all got the call. It was time to come to Grandma and Grandpa's house. And I am telling you, Melanie, when I walked in, so my grandparents were born in 1911 and 1913. And so this was not new to them. That generation experienced births and deaths at home primarily. And so they were used to this. And they knew how somehow to do this in a way that was beautiful and dignifying and loving and warm. And I did not know, in experiencing a good death, that was odd, um, that's really unusual in our culture. We so often hear about and experience really tough deaths, like where people are kept alive for a long time and like everybody's dragged through a long process, and the stresses of that. So watching these adults navigate it so beautifully really stuck with me for a long, long time. Now contrast that with uh, the death of my grandmother on my mother's side that same year. This was a woman who had experienced so much trauma in her life. Again, I believe she was born in 1913 and, lost her father in the flu epidemic. It was never talked about. Had multiple very difficult step parents. That was also very, very unaddressed, and the pain and trauma from some of that. She was suicidal when I was a teenager. That's not how it was articulated to me, but she had become an alcoholic and went into rehab. And so we would visit her, where she was getting care. And when she eventually got cancer, she lived with us briefly, and she was in this state of deep uh, brokenness through that whole thing. Um, she was not in her right mind a lot from pain or whatever medications. Um, I watched my mother navigate that so lovingly and beautifully. But it was really painful to see how unaddressed trauma locks a person into so much unprocessed stuff. That woundedness and her rejection of faith. She never was like negative about that with me as a teenager. She was always wonderfully supportive, but um, it was scary to not be sure of that I would get to see her again, like I just didn't know. And thank God for my dad who said, at the end of the day, we're going to make mistakes in all of this theologically, but at the end of the day, we err on the side of grace.
Mhm.
We err on the side of grace. We just love her through whatever, because we can't control the outcome. She's a human being and she is loved by God more than we could ever love her. And so once a queen, this is probably a longer version than what you're expecting, but once a queen, my main character Eva meets her grandmother for the first time and experiences an adult who is very broken, and she begins to kind of take that on herself and think, I can save her because I remember that feeling. If we can only do this one right thing, if we can only, we can save her. But that job has already been taken. And I think it was important for me to narrate a family story where a teenager is having to navigate that.
Mhm. Yes, because teenagers are often very aware of
Mhm,
those
mhm.
unspoken, um, what word do I want to use? Just issues. How about just issues?
Yeah,
That there are
yeah.
these unspoken issues that are really driving so much of the behavior in the
Mhm,
family. And
mhm,
if there is really a taboo in your family about openly addressing them, it can
mhm,
cause a lot of upset and
mhm,
confusion for our kids. So, I mean, I just got done telling someone who is a family friend who has been through a traumatic experience that we used to think that just burying trauma was the thing to do. Like, just don't
mhm,
talk about it,
mhm,
just move forward.
mhm,
And we know, especially from studying veterans, that that is the worst thing that we can do. Those
mhm,
individuals who just pretend like everything is fine do the worst. Now,
mhm.
no one wants to, just start the process of talking about trauma or grief.
Yeah,
Um,
right, right.
it's hard. It's you
Mhm,
want to avoid it. No one wants to just sob and sob. Some people think if I start crying about this, I'll never stop. It's just going to
Yeah.
go on forever. I'm
Yeah.
just not even
Yeah.
going to be able to survive it. But the
Mm.
truth is that you're going to be healthier and happier after you do it. And it's also not a one-time event, right?
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah.
I just tell my story one time and then everything's great. It's things are going to
Mhm.
come back up and you're going to want to talk about it. And I would just kind of interject one other thing. And so if you're a young person or really anyone that you know has experienced grief or loss or trauma and they've told you their story and then somewhere down the road they're telling it to you again, don't get them to stop. Don't
Yeah.
say,
Yep.
okay, we've covered it, we got to move on. No,
Mhm.
this is the
Mhm.
healing process and it
Right.
comes in waves and it comes unexpectedly as we go
Mhm.
throughout our lives. So, um, I just love that you're bringing up this whole idea of
Yeah.
um, your grandmother is an example of someone who obviously did not have that opportunity to talk
Yeah. Oh,
through
absolutely.
everything that
Mhm.
she had gone through.
Mhm.
And it's like I think maybe as Christians too, we get this message that it's complaining. It's
Yeah, or
not.
that we're,
Yeah.
we're diminishing God's character or God's ability to step in somehow.
Right.
But if that was the case, then half the Psalms wouldn't be there in the Bible,
So
right? Like
true.
where are you, God? Let's flex some muscles and show up and come to our defense. What's going on? Your reputation's at stake. That's one of my
Right.
favorite ones.
Yeah.
It's like, don't you know what people are saying about you,
Mhm.
God? Um,
Mhm.
so, but
Well,
it's
right.
with
Right. That
I
is so
think
good. I
about
mean, God could have prevented those from being
yeah.
in scripture,
Yeah.
and he
Oh, yeah.
didn't.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
And
even like the
Jesus,
communities that wrote them could have been like, yeah, no,
and
we're not
even
going to put that in there.
Jesus paraphrased that
Hmm.
scripture. Why
Psalm
have you
22.
forsaken me, God?
Yes. And he doesn't say, why does it feel like you've
Mm.
forsaken me? Like he is just, he's just saying this
Mhm.
thing, which I
Mhm.
find really interesting.
Yes, it
Because
really is.
it's so important for our young people to have those experiences validated as places where God can show up and
Mhm.
does show up and is actually there ahead of us, right?
Mhm.
So that's I think about as you were talking, I remember the very same year I lost my uncle and my grandmother and watched these two very different ways of for them of processing what their experiences. I also had my first breakup.
Oh,
I was 14 and it
oh
was
boy.
like New Year's Eve and it was so like the guy dumped me. And because I'd been so kind of not sure of what was happening with my grandmother, I had distanced myself a little bit because I realized it was like something happening that was way bigger than me and over my head. I wanted to save her and I couldn't, and that frightened me. I wanted to know where God was and why, he's supposed to do this is the part of the story where she like has a prayer of confession and commits her life to Christ before she dies, but that's not how it worked. So I didn't understand the narrative I was in. Um, and so I didn't cry when she died, which my mom and dad were so patient with me. I didn't cry till New Year's Day, and we were driving up north to visit my other grandparents. And I just cried and cried and cried. And they were wise enough to know it wasn't because this idiot had dumped me, it was everything. It was everything. I was finally giving myself permission to feel what I needed to feel. So you're right, there's no timeline on that.
Mhm.
Um, and I probably didn't wanna talk about this guy, I didn't wanna talk about my grandmother, but they just let me do what I needed to do, and I'm super grateful for that. And I'm realizing that's a pattern I've then carried into working with teens, having my own kids, in part the happy and sad stuff is one of those very simple practices to make it normal to talk about how you feel before the big feelings actually happen, like you or after
Mhm.
they happen.
Mhm.
Like it's harder to do it in the middle of it, right? But
Mhm.
when you have that regular practice, then it's just built in to who you are as a family.
Mhm. And it just occurred to me that um, I think we need to add in that when someone is sharing about a loss or a trauma and they're sad and they're crying, that we don't have to do anything to fix
Mhm.
that. And it
Mhm.
really, I mean, we really feel that strong pull to want
Mhm.
to make someone feel better. Because when our child falls down and scrapes their knee, I mean, we comfort and we say, "Okay, let me make it better. Let's put a
Yeah,
bandage on. Let's have
right.
some ice cream." It's
Mhm.
all good.
Mhm.
But when it's something bigger than that, the thing to do is what Job's friends did
I was
initially.
just gonna
Were
mention
you?
Job.
That's so
Yes,
funny. Yeah, I
yes.
think we're on the same wavelength with a lot of this.
Mhm.
But when I had a miscarriage, my friend
Mm.
flew into town,
Mhm.
and I just remember the one thing that she did that meant the most to me was she just put her hand on my shoulder.
Mhm.
She was saying, I am here and it is
Mhm.
okay. You take your time to feel what you're going to feel, to process what you need to process. I'm not going
Mhm.
to slow you down. I'm not going to tell you, you know, stop crying. It's fine. you know,
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
and that's really all we have to do is provide that physical presence, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Listen, if you need to give them a Kleenex because it's just it's just going
Mhm.
everywhere, you can
Mhm.
do that really like without making a big deal of it.
Mhm.
Um, but put your hand on their shoulder. Give them a hug if it feels right. But we don't have to interject and fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a huge impulse to do that too, because it's again, I mean, we're taught to kind of tidy things up and there should be a conclusion here. But in those spaces we're beyond words.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, we were talking about Job. I mean, where his friends get in trouble is when they start to introduce words to his story. But first they come and sit with him for 7 days in silence.
Hmm.
And it is actually still a Jewish tradition to sit Shiva, which is those 6 days of
Hmm.
sitting with somebody in their grief.
Hmm.
Um, and I love that tradition. And then when those days are over, they in some traditional Jewish communities, they bring the grieving person out for a walk around the block in the neighborhood, as if to say, "Here is the world, and we are
Hmm.
in it with you." And there isn't speechifying or anything, and they get a lot of that from Job, right?
Hmm.
With what
Oh,
his friends did
that's
there. And I've actually done
cool.
stuff, in teaching Job with teenagers where we talk about, what are some things that are helpful when people are grieving? What are things that are not helpful?
Hmm.
And that's yeah, it's been really robust
I
to
bet.
take a look at those moments in scripture where, um, there isn't a solution, like, there isn't a conclusion that matches our sort of Hallmark movie, vibes.
Hmm.
And those are lovely stories too, right? But it's,
Hmm.
the whole range of human emotion and experiences that I'm interested
Hmm.
in exploring with teenagers.
Right.
So my character Eva in Once a Queen, recognizes the brokenness, wishes she could save her grandmother from having to experience, from all of it, like, wants to be part of the healing. And, and not to give too many spoilers, but there is a moment of just sitting and holding a hand, right? And I wanted to depict that to give teens a sense of, I this is a book full of words, but that's not the only option. And sometimes that's not the only thing somebody needs. Yeah.
So you have written a story about someone who has to go through that process of adjusting to loss, and
Mhm, mhm.
um, grief. Did writing your story help you with grief and processing grief? And do you think that writing is, and I already have an opinion, but do
Right,
you
right,
think that
yeah.
writing can help
Mhm.
teens do the same thing?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I set out to write the story with that in mind. I feel like those things just sort of came in as the story was unfolding because this is who my characters turned out to be. Um, I really and e I think that my character Eva, has these moments of recognizing. Well, and I had to kind of layer this in, right? Because it can be so overt that it's, like, blunt and not, um, really helpful, like, it's just sort of like a prescription, like, I'm writing a prescription, like, "This is what you need to do." So I had to kind of tease this out and fold it in carefully. Um, she is at some points, uh, assuming it's her fault, and I think a lot of kids
Mm,
do this too, that if an adult is acting this way, they did something wrong, and so she has really put a lot of this on her shoulders, hence her desire to be part of the healing, right, to make it better somehow also, and so that was important to me, but that's not actually something I experienced with my own story that I just told, so that comes from having listened to teenagers and kids a
mm,
lot. Um, and and but part of what happened in the writing of the story is that towards the end, when we were really nailing down those last drafts with my editors, um, I had just gone through chemo for
mm,
breast cancer after I'd already written like the basic story. So you know the story. I'm not going to do any spoilers, but I had already experienced that when my sons were ages 4 and 7.
mm,
And so because we already had that happy and sad practice with our sons, we were able, they had space to talk about how they were feeling.
mhm,
And there were days I couldn't hug them. I'd had a
right.
mastectomy and I couldn't get sick during chemo. We had to be careful about germs that came home from school and that sort of thing. Um, but we wanted to talk with them in such a way that they could bear the emotions that were being expressed by the adults. Um, but without, like, being so overprotective that we couldn't that they couldn't experience what they needed to themselves, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, I don't cry very often, so, at one point I cried, I was just feeling so crummy, and my 4-year-old freaked out. And his instinct was to hug me, which was so sweet, but of course I couldn't because I was all bandaged up. Um, and so I think a lot of this is just as families we're learning, right? And stories and writing can be ways that we get stuff out that we don't know how to do in our everyday interactions. So when my husband read the book and got to parts in the end, he sobbed, right? He just sobbed. He had lost his stepmom earlier in the year to cancer,
Mm,
and then I had gotten my diagnosis, and it was just a mess of a year. And then his dad died right after my second infusion. So it was like, and I knew he had been carrying so much, and I knew he was sad, but when he read the book, there was something about the fiction written by me that unlocked a lot for him.
mhm,
And yeah, I think that not just the reading of it, but the writing of it too can be a way to process things we didn't even know we needed to.
mhm. Yes, and, I have felt that as a fiction writer. I write fictional nonfiction, so
Oh,
narrative
mhm. Mhm.
nonfiction,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I have had a few stories that after I have written them and then gone back and reread them that they really, really touched me. And so it
Mm,
was
mhm,
something that I was putting into it that I didn't even realize that I needed to process. So I think it's kind of a back door to getting
yes.
anyone really, right? Anyone
Yeah.
to kind of go through and think about and share what it is that they're feeling. And I have a a young formerly homeschooled student of mine for writing who went through a very traumatic experience and it
Mm,
was a long lasting one. And when it first
mm,
occurred, the first thing I said to him was, write it down, journal it,
yeah,
write it.
yeah.
And he, it has just now been resolved. And I asked him if, where he was with that. And he said, I'm finishing the story. I'm finishing the story.
Mm,
And I really believe that that helped keep him going. Um,
sure. Yeah.
so I just highly recommend journaling, or if you
Mm,
don't want to journal, then just writing fictional stories. As we've been
mhm,
sharing, you can
mhm.
put what you're feeling into your stories in a way that helps you,
Yes.
and it can help other people. So, you
Yes.
were
Yeah.
touching on reading fiction can help teens process grief. Do you have any
Mm,
ideas for us about how we can, find books? I mean, we have yours that we're going to talk about in just a moment, but if we have a child, a teen who is dealing with some issues, do you have any suggestions for us about how we can find books that will help them process those big
mm,
feelings?
mhm. Yeah. Um, that's interesting. I thought you were gonna ask me, ways to get them writing. So I
Yeah.
have a whole answer prepared for that.
Well, you go
Um,
ahead. Let's start with
yeah,
that, and then
yeah,
we'll
because
come back to the books.
obviously, there's lots of wonderful literature out there, and I could we that could be a whole other episode actually. So,
Yeah.
because I have so many colleagues that are doing wonderful work out there.
Okay.
Um, yeah, that's I could do tons of lists. And actually I do have a bookshop page. I'm an
Okay.
affiliate with Bookshop, and I've listed some of my favorite books for teenagers and
Perfect.
young readers. And my sons are
Perfect.
also have their own list on my bookshop page of like Arthur Brothers favorite hits kind of things.
Okay.
So you can go there,
Okay.
and I pick those because in part my colleagues are doing such incredible work. And
Wonderful.
those are great lists.
Okay.
But if
But
you don't
then,
mind me talking a little
no,
bit
let's
about
let's
teens
back up then.
writing,
How can we get our
I've
teens to
seen
write?
lots of different models for this. One, I loved what this one mom did. She and her daughter kept a journal together. The mom was an extrovert, the daughter was an introvert, and when the daughter became a teenager, be like, "How was your day?" "Great." And that was it. A whole long car ride home of one sentence
Mm.
answers to her questions. Um, so I can't remember if it was when a grandparent died or something happened. Mom put a journal down on the girls' like place at dinner and was just like made a little note that said, "Hey, I'm going to keep this in the top drawer at the top of the stairs. And if you want to write in it, once you've written in it, go ahead and put the picture of grandma face up on the table that it's in that drawer." And then once I've done it, I'll put it, I'll put a different picture. And so they would each write in this journal and just keep it in the drawer. And they knew when the other person had written in it by this little signal they gave each other. And so while they weren't doing these like conversations, the journal became the space for them to talk to each other, which I found so fascinating and beautiful. So I love that. And then I also, and not everybody's a writer, so would not necessarily do this with their kids, but as I'm writing book two, Once a Castle, um, I decided, okay, well, the boys are old enough. I'll read Once a Queen to them, which I'd done all along, like during COVID. But I read the final drafts so they could see how their ideas and questions had kind of made their way into the story. And so they would see me working. And at one point, Sam, my youngest, who's 10, wanted to He's like, I wanna write." I was like, "Well, here, you can do we've got lots of journals around." He's like, "No, I wanna type like you do, mommy." So we had a really old laptop and pulled that up, and we got him into his school account, which is a Google account, so he could do
Mhm.
Google Docs. And I was like, "Well, one thing I love to do is writing sprints. You wanna do a writing sprint with me?" And he was like, "Sure, what is that?" And I was like, "Well, we set a timer and we write without stopping. Like, we don't overthink, we just write and write and write. And if you're here with me, I'm much more likely to stick to it. So do you wanna do that?" And so periodically, we'll do writing sprints. We'll set a timer for 10 minutes, sit right next to each other, and just start typing, whatever we're working on. He is 8,000 words into, like, a chapter book that he's writing.
Wonderful. That's great.
And he's picked up the habit of reading to me the section that he just wrote, just
Oh,
like I've been doing for Once a Castle. When I write a chapter, I'll read it to the boys.
okay.
And it's been delightful. It's
It
just
is.
delightful. But you could do that with anything. Let's say a parent is like wrapping Christmas presents. Be like, "Okay, I'm going to do a Christmas present wrapping sprint. And why don't you work on your story and we'll set a timer and we'll both be creative for like 10 minutes." And inevitably, we set another 10-minute timer and another because we're on a roll,
Mm,
right? So, even if you're not a writer, you could pick whatever creative project you're working on and do that while they're writing.
yeah. And I also I also think that, when our kids lose a loved one, that they could also, even if they don't actually share it at a memorial service, they could write something
Mhm,
that,
mhm,
just kind of encapsulates how they loved this person and what they meant to them.
mhm,
And
mhm,
my son actually did that spontaneously when his grandfather died for a
mhm,
writing class. It was just this very poignant story about him,
mhm,
and I could tell that it really helped him to process that grief. Now that was his idea, but I think we could encourage our kids
mhm,
to do it. Um,
mhm.
and
Yeah.
we can, as homeschooling moms, we can count it as an English assignment for sure, for sure.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
yes.
And the other thing that I would encourage, parents to think about is that they may not be writing directly about the grief.
Hmm.
Sort of like how I just had a great idea for a story and started writing Once a Queen, and that got layered in because we're human beings, and whatever
Hmm.
we've marinated in, that flavor tends to come out in our creative work. So same with a painting or a dance or anything your kid's working on may have nothing to do with, like, you might be like, "Grandma just died, kid. Like, why are we like you might wanna try to be prescriptive with it, but the very act of creating and using your imagination can sometimes unlock things that they're not expecting and you're not expecting, and the final product may not have anything to do with grandma, but I really encourage people to provide that space.
Right.
It's like a room they're invited to enter and walk around it.
Hmm.
And yeah,
Yes.
it's interesting to see how the Holy Spirit works through the imagination in ways we can't
Hmm.
predict.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I want to talk about Once a Queen. Now, I have started reading it and I'm
Mhm.
excited to finish it over this holiday break when we are recording this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and you can tell me that that's not true, but I get a Chronicles of Narnia type vibe, at least at the beginning.
Ooh,
Is that
yes.
is that
Yeah,
okay? Is
there's
that accurate, do you think?
I'm influenced by all kinds of classic fairy tales.
Mhm.
You see E. Nesbit in there, Frances Hodgson Burnett's The Secret Garden. I mean, there's
Mhm.
vibes of that too. A little bit of Madeline L'Engle, Wrinkle in Time,
Mhm.
Portal kinds of things, and Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, that's all the landscape of my imagination. So absolutely. I mean, part
Very
of the
good.
question that animates it is, all right, um, so let's say some of these fairy tales, stories that we love to read, and Eva has a fairy tales collection that she read as a kid, that I've invented, right? And that's in her mind, it's like, well, what if those were true? And what if those children did have adventures in other worlds and came back. Like what happens to those people when they come back and grow up here, you know?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
some of that is animating the story. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what age readers do you think
Mm.
Once a Queen is for?
Yeah, so in the process of finding a publisher, it really went all over the place. It started off kind of young adult, and then they wanted middle grade at a different publishing house. And I was like, I can try that, but there's a lot of relationships and family emotions going on, which an 8-year-old kid might not resonate with so much. So in my mind, it's really young teen. So
Mhm.
like 12-ish, tween and up.
Mhm.
But at the end of the book, she's older,
Mhm.
and, you haven't gotten to that point yet. It
No.
actually is a Christmas story by the end, and
Oh,
she's older,
okay.
and so that's really fun. I love that it's coming out in January 30th, after we've gone through this whole holiday
Mhm.
season. Um,
Mhm.
and so I find that if people loved middle grade and young teen and young adult literature as teens, they're going to love this book no matter what age they are.
Mhm.
I still go back and read The Westing Game and,
Mhm.
Wrinkle in Time and Secret Garden. I don't think of
Mhm.
those as children's books. I think of those
Mhm.
as the stories that shaped me, that speak to me no matter what age I am.
Right. Right, and I'm definitely not getting that vibe like, "Oh, I'm reading a children's book,"
Mm,
either.
mm,
Like I said,
yeah.
I wanna keep reading it, so,
Yeah,
um,
great. Good.
and, one thing I just wanna clarify with you because I know my
Mhm,
audience is gonna be interested in this. I mean, you're a Christian, so,
mhm.
families don't have to worry about some kind of, like, nasty surprises being included
Mm,
in the book, right?
yeah, well, that's not what it's about. I mean, a lot of young it's labeled young adult because,
Mhm.
again, it's not quite at the middle grade end of things, but young adult is, and I love, Sarah Mackenzie from Read Aloud Revival.
Mhm.
Like, she blew my mind with this because she calls young adult a genre and not just
Mhm.
like an age-based,
Right.
category.
Right.
And so with that genre comes, a lot of angst and teens exploring and experimenting with maybe things they shouldn't.
Mhm.
But as a youth worker, like I find, the things they experiment with were not invented by teenagers. It's adults doing those things. Um,
Right.
I just am less interested in that stuff. I'm much more interested in the family relationships
Mhm.
and that fear that when you grow up, you have to give up the stories and the joy and beliefs that you have, the childlike
Mhm.
faith. And I don't think you should. I don't think you
Right.
should give up. But that's what Eva's afraid of.
Yeah.
That she'll
Yeah.
have to put all of that aside.
Hmm.
And so that's so it's young adult in the sense of kind of the age range, but not necessarily fitting with that genre.
Very good. Okay. So you told me before we started that there are some pretty amazing pre-publication, pre-order, I should say, pre-order bonuses. So can you tell
Yeah.
our listeners where they can find Once a Queen and also how they can get those bonuses and then connect with you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So my publisher is Waterbrook, and there's just this super creative team. I would throw out an idea and they'd be like, "That sounds amazing." So one of you can if you go to saraharthur.com, and that's Sarah with an H, you'll find in the menu is Once a Queen, and when you click on that, you go to the publisher's website for the book. And in the menu options for that, you'll see exclusive bonuses. So if you click on that, that's where all the pre-order perks and it walks you through what to do. If you've pre-ordered it really from any retailer, and just then enter that information through the publisher, then they'll give you access to the first 3 chapters for digital download. So right now, I think only chapter 1 is just available out there, but you would get the first 3. And then we created a Once a Queen journal that is a digital printable PDF, that includes some original sketches that I did that was part of my brainstorming for the book. And creativity prompts, they won't have read the book yet, but those creativity prompts get them thinking about dreaming up their own worlds and characters. And if you could write a letter to your favorite fictional character of all time, what question would you ask them? Sketch, if you ended up in a fantasy world, what would you be wearing? Draw a picture of that. So I just love that because it's not only great for youth workers and families, but homeschooling too, and ages 12 and up, right? Just
Right.
get creative and have some fun. We had an event, a young adult event at a local bookstore where my publisher provided the journal for the teens that showed up for that. And we had gem stickers and ways to bling out the front cover, and the kids had a blast.
Cool. That's very cool. Yes,
Yeah.
I think my audience is going to be interested in that. I definitely have families listening right now, and they have aspiring authors. I hear from them all the time, and I just
Oh,
love that. It makes me
absolutely.
so
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
well, Sarah, this was wonderful. I have enjoyed it so much, and I can't wait to get back to reading the book. And then, of course, once I
Mm.
do and you get it published, I am going to review it for you. I know that is so, so important for
Thank you.
authors.
Oh, bless you. Yes, that is lovely. We're so grateful. It's like if you wanted to think of a Christmas gift for me, that would be that would be the one. Thank you.
You are very welcome. Find the links to pre-order Once a Queen and connect with Sarah at homeschoolsanity.com/teen loss. Have a happy homeschool week. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I hope something you heard was encouraging. If you have a personal question to follow up, don't hesitate to message me. I'm at Homeschool Sanity on social media. Be sure to check my free resource page at homeschoolsanity.com/resource and find Sanity Saving Curriculum at funtolearnbooks.com. This has been a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.